100 warriors drew their blades, and every one of them pointed at me. The cup was already falling. I caught it against my palm before it struck the stone. Wine ran down my wrist, wine that should have stopped a king's heart by morning. And a woman's voice cut across the hall like a thrown knife. Witch. 3 weeks earlier, I had opened a door I was told never to open. Behind it in the dark, a wound that would not close. 2 years it had bled. Every healer sent to tend it had walked out, changed or scarred or not at all. And the strongest wolf alive had chosen to rot behind that door rather than let a single soul see what he was hiding. I was the lowest-ranked person in that fortress. I ate last. I slept by the window. And now his great gold wolf stood between me and every drawn blade in the room. Snarling, not at me. Everyone in that hall knew which door not to open. I was the only one who hadn't been warned. But that is not where I want to begin. I want to begin with the night the whole court went silent. I was on his knees on the dais, and the cup was already falling. I remember the sound it did not make. No clatter, because I caught it against my palm before it struck the stone, and the wine that should have been in his blood by morning ran down my wrist instead. 100 faces, his among them, looking up at me with an expression I did not yet have a name for. A woman's voice high and certain throwing the word witch across the hall like a stone. And the king's wolf, enormous and gold-eyed, stepping between me and every drawn blade in the room before its own master could rise. I did not know in that moment whether I had saved his life or ended mine. So let me go back. It started 3 weeks before any of that. With a door I was told to sweep past and did not. I had been in the household 4 days when they sent me to the wrong wing. That is the honest version. Bryn the healer's mistress, a brisk woman who had inherited me the way one inherits a draft under a door, handed me a tray of clean linen and a pot of steeped willow, and she told me to leave it outside the 3rd door, and not to knock. I was 22 years old, newly bound to a household I had not chosen. The lowest-ranked person in a fortress full of wolves who could hear my heartbeat from across a corridor. Omega. The word followed me like a smell I could not wash off. In the village I came from it meant gentle hands and a soft throat. Here it meant last to eat and first to be forgotten. I had made my peace with that. Peace is cheaper than pride, and I could not afford pride. What I could not make peace with was a wound left to rot behind a closed door, because everyone was too frightened to tend it, because I could smell it. Even through oak, even under the smoke and the pine of the pack house, I could smell the particular sweetness of a wound that had been dressed wrong and left too long. My grandmother taught me that smell before she taught me my letters. It means someone is dying slowly enough that the people around them have stopped noticing. So I knocked. Nobody had told me that the 3rd door in that corridor was the one door in the whole kingdom you did not open. Nobody had told me the man behind it was the Alpha King Rurik of the Iron Territories, the strongest wolf alive who had turned away every healer sent to him for 2 years and sent the last one out with a scar she would carry to her grave. Nobody had told me that he did not permit anyone to see him weak, because a weak alpha is a dead alpha, and a dead alpha is a leaderless pack, and a leaderless pack is a war waiting for a reason. I knew none of it. I knocked, and when no one answered, I went in. The room was dark and cold as a cellar. The fire had burned down to a sullen orange, and in the bed, propped against the headboard like a felled tree, someone had leaned upright was the largest man I had ever seen, watching me, with eyes the color of a coin held to a flame. "You are not Bryn," he said. "No." I agreed. I set the tray down. "Bryn is afraid of you. I don't have the seniority to be afraid of you yet." I looked at him. "Give me a week." I did not know he was the king. I want that understood. I thought he was some old warrior the household kept out of sight. Some proud uncle too stubborn to die politely. If I had known, I would still have gone in. But I would not have said that. And he knew it. He did not laugh. But something moved at the corner of his mouth, like a man remembering a language he used to speak. "The wound on your side is killing you," I said, because there was no point being delicate about a smell that filled the whole room. "May I look at it?" It was not really a question. He noticed that too. His jaw worked. "No one looks at it. Then no one has been doing their job." I was already rolling my sleeves. "I'm new. I haven't learned yet which jobs I'm allowed to refuse." There is a particular silence a powerful man makes when he has forgotten what it is like to be spoken to, as though he is simply a person with a problem that has a solution. I have come to know that silence very well. That night it was only a stranger's silence, and I filled it with the practical noise of a healer at work. Unstoppering the willow, tearing linen, asking him to turn toward what light there was. And here is the thing I have never told anyone. When I peeled back the old dressing, and the wound was exactly as bad as my nose had promised, a deep, ragged thing along the ribs that should have closed months ago, and had instead been kept open like a mouth that would not stop speaking, I did not flinch. Not because I am brave, because I was concentrating. Fear is a luxury of people who have the leisure to imagine outcomes. I had a wound in front of me and 2 hands, and the 2 hands occupy the whole of a person if you let them. I watched me not flinch, and something in that room, something that was not. The man went very still and very attentive. The way a wolf goes still when it has heard a sound it has been waiting years to hear. I would learn what that stillness was soon enough. That night I only cleaned. I packed. I told him the wound would have to be reopened properly and drained, and that it would hurt, and that I would not lie to him about the hurting. Because people who lie to you about pain cannot be trusted about anything. He listened. And when I stood to go, he spoke to my back. "What is your name?" "Elva." "Elva." He said it the way you test the weight of a blade you did not expect to like. "You truly do not know who I am. You're the man in the 3rd room," I said. "Who is going to let me back in tomorrow? Because your side is going to feel worse before it feels better. And you're going to want the one healer who isn't scared of your temper." I paused at the door. "Whoever you are." I found out who he was the next morning. Bryn saw where I had come from and dropped an entire tray of tinctures. The clatter of it brought 2 servants running, and the whole household knew by midday. The Omega, the new one, the one who walked into the king's sick room and walked back out with all her skin. They looked at me in the corridors the way you look at someone standing on thin ice who does not appear to know it. And I did not tell them how much I already knew about thin ice, how I had lived my whole life on it. That is the thing about being born to the bottom. You learn where the cracks are before you learn to walk. Gunnar found me by the well before noon, the king's second. A broad, quiet man with a scar through one eyebrow and the weary patience of someone who has spent years managing a grief he is not permitted to name. "You went into the 3rd room," he said. "I did. Do you understand what you did? I dressed a wound that 6 of your healers were too frightened to touch. I hauled my bucket up over the lip of the well. And I'm going back this afternoon to do it again, because it is going to kill him inside the month if someone does not, and I would rather it not be on the week I arrived." I looked at him. Is there a reason you'd all prefer he die tidily behind a closed door? Because I have met men like that, and I have never once understood them. Gunnar looked at me a long moment. Whatever he had come to warn me away from, he set it down. He let you back in, he said, half to himself. He has not let anyone back in since, and he stopped. That stop had a shape to it. A person-shaped hole. I noticed it, and I filed it away, the way I file away everything I am not yet meant to understand. Since who? I said. Come to the hall tonight, Gunnar said instead. The king takes his meal there when he is well enough to sit. He has not been well enough in some time. If he is tonight, it will be because of you. And the court will need to see who did it. A grim flicker at the corner of his mouth. Wear something you don't mind being looked at in. I owned 2 dresses. I wore the less patched one. And I told myself I was not nervous, which is the particular lie you tell yourself right before you learn exactly how nervous you are. The Great Hall of the Iron Territories is built to make you feel small, and it succeeds. Stone the color of a storm cloud. A fire pit you could roast an ox in. And at the head of it, a throne carved into the shape of a rising wolf, so that whoever sat there sat inside the jaws of it. Long tables. 100 wolves who had all heard the story of the Omega and had all come to look at her. And on the table at the king's right hand, beside his own cup, a second cup. Empty, turned very slightly inward, the way you set a place for someone. No one touched it. No one filled it. No one looked at it, which is how I knew everyone in that hall was always looking at it. I did not know whose it was. I would. The king came in on his own feet, which I gathered from the way a room of hardened warriors tried to hide their shock behind their cups was a thing that had not happened in weeks. He was pale and moving like a man carrying something heavy and invisible. But he was upright, and his eyes found me at the low end of the hall before he had taken 3 steps. That was mistake enough. An alpha king does not look for the lowest-ranked person in the room. But it was not the king who disgraced us both that night. It was his wolf. I had not seen him shift. I did not see it then. He did not shift, not fully. And that is the point. The great gold beast simply seemed to arrive, pacing out from behind the throne as though it had been waiting. And the hall went silent. Silent in the particular way a hall goes silent when the natural order has just been broken over someone's knee. The wolf came straight down the length of the great hall, past the nobles, past the ranked warriors, past a beautiful woman near the dais who half rose with her hand extended and her chin lifted, every expectation on her face that the beast was coming to her. The most beautiful woman in the room. Raised I would learn to be the Luna of the Iron Territories, since before she could walk. The wolf did not so much as slow for her. It came to me, at the very foot of the tables, and it lay down across my feet with a thud that shook the trestles. And it put its enormous head in my lap. And it sighed. The sigh of an animal that has finally set down a weight it has carried alone for 2 years. I sat there with the king's wolf in my lap, and 100 wolves staring, and my hand of its own accord came to rest on that great gold skull, as though it were any frightened creature I had ever gentled. At the head of the hall, the king had gone the color of ash. He opened his mouth. He closed it. For the strongest wolf alive, he looked in that moment exactly like a man whose dog has done something unforgivable in front of important guests, and who has no earthly idea how to explain that the dog is smarter than he is. He does not, Rurik said, and stopped. His voice was not working correctly. He does not do that. He seems fairly certain that he does, I said, and the wolf's tail thumped once against the stone. And somewhere down this table, a young warrior made the fatal mistake of laughing, and then could not stop. And then the whole low end of the hall was shaking with the kind of helpless laughter that only escapes when everyone has been frightened for a very long time and is suddenly absurdly not. The king of the Iron Territories stood in the jaws of his wolf throne and watched his own beast choose a kitchen-adjacent omega in front of his entire court and could not command it back. And I understood two things at once. The first was that I was in more danger now than I had ever been in my life. The second was that his wolf had known something about me for exactly 1 day, and his mouth had not caught up to it yet. And I was going to spend a great deal of time watching the distance between the two. But there was a third thing, and I almost missed it, because while the whole hall laughed and the king stood stricken, and the beautiful woman by the dais slowly lowered the hand no one had taken, I looked out of the habit of a person who has always had to watch the room to survive it. And I found the one face that was not laughing, the one face that was not afraid, the one face that was instead quietly, carefully pleased. Carefully, a lord near the high table, silver at his temples, a cup held loose in his fingers, watching King falter in front of his own court, the way a man watches a crack spread across ice he has been waiting on all winter. He felt me see him, and he smiled at me. A warm, courteous, entirely empty smile. The smile of a man who has just been handed something useful and has not yet decided how to spend it. I did not know his name that night. Lord Caddock, uncle to the woman the wolf had passed. And I would come to learn that his was the only kind of danger that never once raised its voice. But that is later. That night I knew only that a king had been humiliated by his own grief in front of 100 witnesses, and that at least one of those witnesses had been glad. And I filed it away with the rest of what I was not yet meant to understand. Gunnar came to me after, in the low torchlight where the servants ate. "You have to understand what happens now," he said, quietly. "Half this court will decide his wolf has lost its mind. The other half will decide you did something to it. There is no version of tonight where they decide it simply chose you, because that would mean it saw something they missed. And these are not people who enjoy being told they missed something. And you," I said, "what did you decide?" I was quiet a while. "I decided," he said, "that his wolf has been trying to tell us something for 2 years, and tonight was the first time any of us were forced to listen." He stood. "Do not go back to the third room." "I'm going back to the third room. I know." He almost smiled. I only had to say it. I lay awake that night on my narrow cot in the healer's wing, and I listened to the fortress breathe around me. And I thought about the empty cup turned inward at the king's right hand, and the person-shaped hole in Gunnar's sentence, and the wound that smelled like dying, but had felt under my hands like something else, something I did not have a word for. And I thought about the wolf, the way it had sighed. Not the sigh of an animal that has found something new. The sigh of an animal that has found something back. I did not sleep much, but somewhere in the dark I made the decision that shaped everything after. Not the grand kind of decision with trumpets. The small, stubborn kind. The kind you make lying on your back, staring at a ceiling you cannot see. I decided I was not going to leave that man to die in a cold room because everyone around him had agreed very politely over 2 long years to let him. I did not yet know what was killing him. I thought I did. I was wrong, and I was about to be more wrong than I had ever been. But I knew the shape of the choice in front of me even before I knew a single one of the reasons it was dangerous. Because everyone in that hall knew which door not to open, and I had already opened it. And I was going back in the morning. The morning after a wolf chooses you in front of 100 people is a strange morning to wake into. Because nothing had changed, and everything had. I was still the lowest-ranked person in the fortress. Still ate last. Still slept on the narrow cot by the drafty window. But now the whole household watched me pass the way you watch weather you are not sure about yet. Not hostile, not kind, waiting. Bryn would not meet my eyes. She handed me the day's tray with her mouth pressed thin, and she said only one thing. Whatever you did in there, undo it before it costs you. I dressed a wound, I said. You know that isn't what I mean. I did. I let it go anyway. Because there is no arguing with fear, and fear was the only thing in the room with us. I went back to the third door. Of course I did. And this time I knocked, and this time he answered, which was its own small landslide. Come in, Elva. I knew my name in his mouth now. It should not have done anything to me. It did something to me. I have decided in the years since to forgive myself for that. The room was less dark than before. Someone had built the fire up. Someone had cracked the shutter, so a single blade of morning came through and lay across the floor. And the king was sitting up on his own, which 2 days ago would have been impossible, watching me come in with those coin-bright eyes, like he had spent the night rehearsing how to look unbothered and had not quite managed it. About last night, he began. Your wolf has excellent taste, I said, setting the tray down. We don't have to discuss it. He put his head in your lap in front of the entire court. He did. I unstoppered the willow. And you turned the color of a fish belly and told everyone he does not do that. Which I'll note is a strange thing, to insist about your own wolf. It rather implies he does exactly that, and you'd prefer he didn't. I was quiet. Turn toward the light, I said. Let me see how the packing held. And that was how we did it those first days. He would try to say something true, and I would hand him a task, because a task is a raft, and a man drowning in a thing he cannot name will grab a raft every time. I did not do it to spare myself. I did it to spare him. There is a mercy in giving a proud man something to do with his hands, while the rest of him figures out how to feel. The wolf lay by the hearth the whole while, watching me, tail thumping now and then against the stone, insufferably pleased. But I want to tell you about the corridor, because the corridor is where I learned what I was standing in the middle of. It happened on the third day. I was coming from the still room with a fresh pot of willow when she stepped into my path, as though she had been waiting for me. And she had been. I understand that now. Lady Myreth, the most beautiful woman in the room, in any room, and she knew it, the way you know the sun is warm without having to think about it. She did not step into my path the way a rival steps into your path. She stepped into it the way a queen steps into the path of a servant she has decided to be gracious to. Which is worse, which is so much worse. You're the healer, she said, warmly. I've wanted to thank you. For what? For trying. She smiled. So many have. It's a terrible thing to watch, don't you think, how hope keeps arriving at that door, and keeps leaving. I said nothing. I have learned that saying nothing is a country most people cannot bear to visit for long, and if you simply stand in it, they will fill the silence with more than they meant to. She filled it. You should know something, she said, lowering her voice, making it kind. Because no one else will tell you, and I would hate for you to be hurt. His wolf has done this before. The willow was warm through the clay against my palm. I kept my face still. There was another, Myreth said, before you, a healer, young, brave like you. The wolf attached to her the very same way, out of nowhere, in front of everyone. Grief does that, you understand. It makes a wolf strange. It reaches for whatever is nearest, and it holds on too hard. Her eyes on mine were lovely and cold as river ice. It nearly killed her. He doesn't remember doing it. His wolf doesn't know its own strength when the wound speaks. She survived. A pause precisely waited, barely, and then the thing she had come to do. Delivered, soft as a blessing. I would hate, she said, for a sweet, brave thing like you to learn that lesson the hard way. She touched my arm once. Warm, sisterly. And she went on down the corridor, and the scent of her roses and something green underneath hung in the air after her like a held note. And I stood there, because it worked. I will not pretend it didn't. It sat in my chest like a swallowed stone all the rest of that day. And I would like to tell you I saw straight through it. But I didn't not at first. It was too well made. It explained too much. It explained the door. It explained the 2 years of turned-away healers. The room kept dark. The scar the last healer carried out. Gunner's sentence with the hole in it. Because if the wolf had hurt someone once, then everyone's fear was not cowardice. It was sense. And I had walked into that room 3 times now, like a fool who thinks the ice is thick, because she has not yet fallen through. I carried that stone all day, and here is what dislodged it. Not cleverness, not courage. A wolf. Because that evening, the great gold beast came and lay across my threshold, the way it had taken to doing so, that I nearly went over it in the dark. And I crouched down, exasperated, and I put my hand on its head to shove it aside. And it looked up at me, and I thought this animal has been trying to get me into that room since the moment I arrived. It stepped over its own king's dignity to choose me. It set a weight down in my lap that it has carried alone for 2 years. And Myrith wants me to believe it means to kill me. An animal does not fight 2 years to reach the one thing it means to destroy. That was the crack in her story. Small. But once I found it, the whole thing came apart in my hands. Because I went looking the next morning for the other healer. The brave young one who nearly died. The cautionary tale. And there was no one. No name anyone would give me. No scar anyone had seen. No grave. When I pressed Bryn, she went pale and said she had heard the same rumor and never once met the woman. When I pressed a laundress who had been in the household 9 years, she frowned and said she thought that story had always just been there. The way stories are with no beginning anyone could point to. A cautionary tale with no one in it. Someone had built that story on purpose. Built it to keep exactly the kind of woman I was out of exactly the room I kept walking into. And the person it served, the person it had always served, was the woman who had been raised to be Luna since before she could walk, and had watched a wolf walk past her outstretched hand. So the danger was not the wolf. The danger was the woman who needed me to be afraid of it. I want to be honest about the thing I understood next because it is the thing this whole story turns on and I did not understand it cleverly. I understood it the way you understand. You have cut yourself a half-second before the pain arrives. Everyone who had warned me which door not to open had been telling me the danger ran one way. That he would hurt me. That the wolf would turn, that grief would reach out and break whatever came close. They had it exactly backward. The danger was not that he would hurt me. The danger was that he would rather die than risk it. That was the whole shape of the door. That was the 2 years. A man does not keep a room dark and turn away every healer because he is protecting his pride. He does it because he is protecting whoever might come through it. From himself. From the wolf. From the storm he could feel building in his own chest and could not name. I was not being proud behind that door. I was being a coward. A brave, loyal, ruinous coward dressed up in the good coat of protection. And no one in 2 years had loved him enough or been foolish enough to walk in and call it what it was. I have a low tolerance for that. I discovered exactly how low that week. So I went back to the third room, and I stopped handing him rafts. I found out about the other healer, I said, before I had even set the tray down. The one your wolf nearly killed. I went very still. Elva. There isn't one, I said. There is no other healer. No name. No scar. No grave. It's a story someone made up to keep women like me out of this room, and it worked for 2 years, and it very nearly worked on me. I set the tray down hard enough to speak for me. So I'm going to need you to tell me the truth about what's behind you keeping this door shut. Because I no longer believe it's the wound. For a long moment I thought he would order me out. His face did the thing a fortress does when the gate is deciding whether to close. And then, slowly, it did not close. There was no other healer, he admitted. Quietly. Like the words cost coin he did not have. That is Myrith's telling. She is not wrong that my wolf is dangerous. She is wrong about the shape of it. Then tell me the shape of it. I can't. And the way he said it. Not won't. Can't. Like a man describing a locked room he has lost the key to. I don't have the words. I have never had the words. That is the entire. He stopped. His hand had gone without his noticing to his own ribs. To the wound. Flat. Pressing. The way you press a door, you are afraid will open. Some things, if I say them, I make them real. And I cannot make this one real. If I make it real, I have to survive it. And I have decided I would rather not. I have thought about that sentence for 6 months. I would rather not. The most powerful wolf alive. The iron territories in his hands. 100 warriors who would die at his word. And he had looked at the one thing hurting him, and decided quietly over 2 long years that he would rather not survive it than say it out loud. And I understood that I was not fighting a wound. I was fighting a decision. All right, I said. And my voice had gone somewhere gentler because you do not shout at a man standing on a ledge. You keep your voice level and you keep talking. All right, you don't have to say it today. But you're going to let me reopen that wound properly tomorrow and drain it the way it should have been done 2 years ago. And I need you to understand what that means. It means the 2 of us in this room, and it going to hurt more than anything has hurt you, and you not sending me out when it does. Can you promise me you won't send me out? I looked at me a long time. No, he said, honestly. I can't promise that. Which is why you should not be in the room. Then we agree, I said, on everything except who decides, and I've decided. I did not know saying it what I was agreeing to. I thought I was agreeing to drain a wound. I was agreeing to walk into the eye of a storm 2 years in the making with my bare hands, and hold a door open that a king had spent everything he had keeping shut. But that is tomorrow's part of the story, and I promised I would not get ahead of it, because there is one more thing I have to tell you about that day. And it is the thing that turned all of this from a sad story about one man into a dangerous story about a kingdom. It was dusk when I left him. And I took the long way back through the colonnade above the courtyard because I needed the cold air, and I needed to not be looked at for a while. And that is where I saw them, where I saw, below me in the blue shadow of the gate, Lord Kadok, the uncle, the one face in the hall that had been glad. He stood close to a man I did not know, a traveler by his boots, road-worn hooded, and they were speaking low and fast the way men speak when the words are worth more than the breath. I would not have thought anything of it, except as the stranger turned to go. His cloak swung open, and I saw the clasp that held it. A brooch worked in dark metal, in the shape I did not yet have a name for, but would learn soon enough. A hound. A running hound with its head down. The mark of Ashfell. The territory across the northern river. The pack that had spent a generation waiting for the Iron Territories to show a soft throat. And Lord Caddock, uncle to the woman who would be Queen Kinsman. King was standing in the dusk, shaking the hand of a man who wore it. I did not understand what I was seeing. I want to be clear about that. I was a healer, barely a week into a household I did not know, and I had no map of who hated whom, or why or what the mark of a running hound might mean. Pressed into the cloak of a man, meeting a lord in the dark. But my grandmother taught me a thing before she taught me my letters, the same as she taught me the smell of a wound gone wrong. She taught me that when powerful people meet where they think no one is watching, the person who happens to be watching should remember every detail, and say nothing, and wait. So I remembered the hound, and I said nothing. And I went back to my narrow cot by the drafty window, and I lay awake a second night in a row, and I thought about a wound that was a decision, and a story with no one in it, and a running hound in the dark. And I could not yet see how any of the three connected, but I could feel that they did. The way you feel a storm 2 valleys off before there is anything in the sky to point at. Something was coming for the man in the third room. Not just the thing inside him, something with a plan and a patience and a smile, like a warm, empty room. And the only person who had seen even a corner of it was a 22-year-old Omega who ate last and slept by the window and had been in the household barely a week. I did not sleep much, but before the light came, I made my second stubborn decision. Smaller than the first, and larger, both at once. I decided that whatever was coming, they would have to come through me to reach him. Which was on the face of it, the single most absurd thing an Omega could decide in a fortress full of wolves who could break me across one knee. Except his wolf had decided the same thing about me first. And I was beginning to think his wolf was the only creature in the whole of the Iron Territories that had been telling the truth from the start. So I got up, and I washed my face in the cold water by the window, and I went to reopen a king's wound with my bare hands. And that is where everything changed. That is the part I have never told anyone all the way through until now. Pull your chair a little closer, because the next part is the cold one. I have told this part to no one, not to Gunnar, who guessed most of it, not to the pack, who deserve it least, not even in the plain words to Rurik, because he was in the room and does not need to be told what happened to him. But you have come this far with me, so you will have it whole. The morning I reopened the wound, the sky was the flat white of high summer. I remember that. I remember it because of what happened to the light inside the room, and because you cannot understand the one without the other. Outside summer. A blackbird somewhere. The ordinary heat of an ordinary day rising off the courtyard stones. Inside the third room, I laid out my things the way my grandmother taught me. Clean linen folded. The good knife the small one honed the night before. Willow and the stronger tincture for the pain, which he refused because, of course, he did. You'll want it, I said. I want to feel it, he said. If you're going to open it, I want to know it's open. I did not argue. There are men who need to be spared their pain, and men who need to be trusted with it, and I had learned by then which one he was. So I gave him a strip of hard leather for his teeth instead, and I told him the truth the way I always told him the truth. This is going to be the worst thing you've felt in 2 years, I said, and I am not going to stop until it's done. So if you're going to send me out now, before I have my hands in it, not after. He looked at me. Coin bright, steady, terrified underneath in a way only I could see, because I had learned where he kept it. Don't stop, he said. So I began. And for a while, it was only a wound. Bad, but only a wound. I worked the way I always work, narrow and certain, letting my hands take the whole of me, so there was no room left over for fear. He breathed through the leather. The wolf paced the walls, a low sound in its chest, round and round, but it did not come near, and I thought, good, it knows to give me room. I was wrong about why, because the deeper I went, the stranger the wound became. And I have dressed wounds since I was a child, and I know what corruption looks like, and what proud flesh looks like, and what a thing looks like when the body is trying to close it, and cannot. And this was none of those. The flesh at the edges was clean, pink, healthy. It had been trying to knit for 2 years. I could see where it had started over and over and been stopped, not by rot, by something holding it open from the inside. "Rurik," I said, slowly, "this wound isn't infected." He said nothing. His eyes had gone somewhere far. "It's clean. It's been clean for a long time. There's nothing in here poisoning you." My hands had gone still, which they never do. Something is keeping it open, on purpose, something that doesn't want it to close. And that is when the cold came. Not a chill, not a draft. I want you to understand the difference, because I did not until it was on me. It came up from the floor, like water finding its level. It came out of him, out of the wound, out of the place under my hands. And the light in the room, the honest summer light coming through the cracked shutter, seemed to thin, to pull back the way the tide pulls back from a shore before the wave. Frost bloomed on the inside of the window. In summer, I watched it happen. White feathers of ice spreading across the glass from the corner in the middle of a summer morning, while a blackbird sang in the courtyard on the other side of it. My breath came out of me in a plume. "Get back," Rurik said. And his voice was wrong, doubled. The man in it and something else in it layered under a sound no throat should make. "Elva, get back. I can't always." "No," I said. The frost reached the floor. It crept toward my knees in fingers of white. And the cold got into me, into my wrists, into the deep of my bones. An ache like winter arriving years early inside my own body. My hands were shaking. I kept them exactly where they were, because I understood all at once the way I understand most true things a half-second before I could have explained it. My grandmother had a word for this. She only said it once to me when I was small, and had asked her why old Marin down the lane had stopped speaking after her boy drowned. Why the woman sat by a cold hearth in the warm months and would not let anyone build the fire. Some wounds, my grandmother said, are not only in the flesh. Grief that is refused long enough stops being a feeling. It becomes a weather. And weather does not care what you want. Weather does what it does to whatever will not get out of its way. "Your wolf will not hurt me," I said, through teeth that wanted to chatter, keeping my hands in the wound. "It has been trying to get me into this room for 2 years, and it finally managed it. It is not going to waste that. You don't know what it will do." The cold was coming off him in waves. Now I could see it, the air itself gone thick and slow, like breathing through wet wool. "You don't know what it did." "Then tell me what it did." And I made my voice level the way you speak to the frightened animal and the frightened man at once, because they were the same creature now, and I could no longer tell where one ended. "Rurik, this wound is not a wound. I've been fighting the wrong thing for a week. It's clean. Your own body wants to close it. Something in you is holding the edges open, and I need you to tell me what it's holding them open for." And the wolf stopped pacing. It came through the frost, across the white floor, and it lay down against my back. Warm, enormous. A furnace at my spine, in a room going to ice. And it put its weight against me the way it had put its head in my lap, and I felt it shaking too, This creature that could kill me without effort, shaking against my back like a dog in a thunderstorm. And Rurik broke, not loudly. He was not a man who could break loudly. He turned his face to the wall so I would not see it, and I heard the leather strip fall from his mouth, and he said one word into the cold, like it was the last coin in his pocket. Corvin. I did not know the name, but I knew the sound a name makes when it is the whole of somebody's grief. I had heard it before in my own mouth over my grandmother's still hands. "Who is Corvin?" I said, softly now, my hand still in the wound, the frost still spreading. But something in the room had shifted, some pressure had found its crack. "My brother." His voice came apart on the second word, and he let it. "My younger brother, Corvin." And then he told me, in pieces, in the wrong order, the way the truest things come out when they have been held under for 2 years and finally break the surface. A battle 3 summers back. The northern ford. An ambush that should not have been possible, that he still did not understand. And I filed that away too, because I was beginning to understand it, even if he was not. A blade meant for the king. 2 blades, and his brother younger faster, throwing himself into the space where the blades were going. "He took the first one for me," Rurik said, "to the wall. And I turned, and I had him. I had him in my arms, and the second blade had already. It was already done. There was nothing, and he was bleeding out through his side. The same side here. His hand went to his own ribs, to the wound. And I could not stop it. I am the strongest wolf alive, and I could not stop my own brother's blood. So he stopped it himself. He put his hand over it, his own hand over the wound in his own side, and he held it so I would not have to watch it, so it would not. And he looked at me, and he said, he could not finish. I did not make him, but I understood now. Oh, I understood the whole terrible architecture of it. Because I looked, truly looked at the wound under my hands, at the shape of it. I had been reading as ragged and wrong for a week. And it was not ragged. It was 3 marks. 2 of them, straight clean, the twin cuts of the twin blades. And between them, over them, laid across them, like a seal, a 3rd mark that was not a blade at all. The print of a hand, a large hand pressed flat, held there, fingers splayed, the exact shape of a palm laid over a wound to hold it shut. Not Rurik's wound. Rurik had taken no blade at the ford. This was Corvin's wound, Corvin's death, and Corvin had died with his hand pressed to his own side, holding himself together so his brother would not have to see him come apart. And Rurik's wolf, which loved the way animals love with an absolute animal, refusal to accept that a thing that was here is now gone, had made a monument of the place that hand had been, had taken the memory of his brother's palm and carved it into his own living body, and had decided in the wordless certainty of a beast that if the wound ever closed, the last of Corvin closed with it. The last warmth, the last touch, the last proof that his brother had been here, had loved him, had held him together with the final strength of his own dying hand. So the wolf kept the door of Rurik's own body open for 2 years, bleeding rather than forget. That is what I had been fighting. Not rot, not corruption. A grief so total it had become weather held in place by a love that would rather kill its own body than let go of a dead man's hand. "You've been dying," I said, and my voice had changed. I heard it change. It had stopped being a healer's voice and become something else, something with iron in the middle of it. For 2 years, on purpose. Because if you healed, you'd have to let go of the last time he touched you. Yes. Barely a word. The frost on the window, the cold in my bones. Yes. Rurik, look at me. I would not turn. Look at me. And he turned. And the strongest wolf alive looked at me with a face that had come all the way apart, a face 2 years past the point where any man should have to hold his own together. And I saw in it exactly what I had smelled through the door on the first day. Someone dying slowly enough that the people around him had stopped noticing. Except I had noticed, and I was not going to unnotice. And I was not going to leave him alone in the cold, with a dead man's hand pressed to his ribs, and no one alive holding the other side. Here is what we are going to do, I said. And I did not decide it the way I have never decided the important things. It was already decided the way his wolf had already decided about me. We are not going to close it today. Do you hear me? I am not going to take Corvin from you. That is not what this is. The frost stopped. I felt it stop. The crawl of it toward my knees simply halted, and the wolf against my back went still, listening. You've been keeping it open in secret, I said. In the dark, alone, until it kills you. And that is not honoring him, Rurik. That is just making your pack bury 2 brothers instead of 1. He held you together with his hand so you would live. Not so you would spend the life he bought you dying by inches in a cold room. I don't know how to let go of it. And there it was. The whole of him in 1 sentence. I have tried. Every healer, every I don't know how. If I let it close, I am letting him go, and I cannot, I will not. Then don't, I said. Not today, not alone. I pressed my own hand flat over the mark of the hand in his side. My small hand over the ghost of his brother's large one. And the cold flinched, and then eased like a held breath let part way out. We keep it open on purpose, together, where I can see it. Where you are not doing it in secret in the dark. You do not get to grieve him by dying, but you do not have to stop grieving him either. Those were never the only 2 doors. I was weeping now. Silently. Enormously. Ashamed and unable to stop the way a man weeps who has not let himself for 2 years and has just been given permission by the one person too new to know he was not supposed to have it. I did not look at him. Some things you give a person by not watching them do it. I kept my hand over the mark, and I kept my eyes on the window on the frost that was beginning slowly to melt 1 white feather at a time, back into ordinary summer glass. And I gave him something to answer that was not the size of what had just happened between us. There's a second cup, I said. At your table, at your right hand, turned inward. Everyone pretends not to see it. I know. It's his. I know. You should fill it. I finished the dressing. My hands had never once stopped the whole while, packing it clean, closing it soft, but not sealed, never sealed, not today. An empty cup says he's gone. A full one says he was here. That's not nothing, Rurik. That's the difference between a grave and a memory. One you visit, the other you carry. I was quiet a long time. The frost was almost gone. The blackbird had never once stopped singing on the other side of the glass in the summer that had gone on the whole time, indifferent and alive. No one speaks to me the way you do, he said at last. Roughened, wrung out. But his own voice again, and the doubling gone, the wolf sunk back down into the warm animal now dozing against my spine. That's their loss and your bad luck, I said. And I sat back on my heels. And my knees ached with the cold that was leaving them, and my hands ached with use, and I felt more myself than I had since I arrived at that grim, beautiful fortress, with 2 dresses, and no idea which doors I was not allowed to open. I'll come tomorrow. We'll keep it open together until you're strong enough to decide about it with your own 2 hands, instead of your wolf deciding for you in the dark. I gathered my things. "Fill the cup tonight," I said at the door. "That's not a healer's order. It's just advice. You're free to ignore it like all the good advice I've ever given anyone." The corner of his mouth did the thing it had forgotten how to do. This time, it remembered all the way. I want to tell you that I walked back to my cot that night, feeling like a woman who had done a great thing. I didn't. I walked back feeling like a woman who had just seen the true shape of what she was standing in and understood for the first time how deep the water was. Because two things had come clear to me on that cold floor, and only one of them was about grief. The first was that I loved him. I am not going to dress that up for you. I had known it, I think, since he refused the pain and asked to feel his own wound open. But I knew it all the way, now kneeling in melting frost with my hand over the print of his dead brother's palm. I loved a king who had chosen for 2 years to die rather than say a single true thing out loud, which is its own kind of madness to love a man like that, and I have never once regretted it. But the second thing was the ambush at the ford. That should not have been possible. 2 blades exactly placed, waiting exactly where the king would turn. Rurik still did not understand how the enemy had known. But I had spent a week now watching a lord with silver at his temples smile at his king's weakness and shake hands in the dark with a man who wore a running hound. An ambush that knew where the king would be. A grief that had hollowed him out for 2 years and left the Iron Territories with a wounded wolf on a throne shaped like jaws, and a patient man, smiling, waiting for exactly that. Corvin had not simply died in a battle. Corvin had died in a trap, and whoever had set it 3 summers ago I was suddenly and coldly certain still in the fortress. Still smiling, still waiting for the wound they had opened to finish the work they had started. I had walked into the 3rd room to heal a wound, and I had found the beginning of a war. I did not sleep at all that night. But near the very end of it, before the light, I went to the one high window in the healer's wing that looked down on the great hall. Dark and empty at that hour, the long tables bear the wolf throne, a black shape in the gray. Except it was not entirely dark, because at the king's right hand, at the head of the empty hall, in the middle of the sleeping fortress, a single candle burned. Small, steady, lit beside a cup that was no longer empty. I had filled it, and I stood at that window with my cold hands wrapped around my own arms, and I watched Corvin's cup catch the light in the dark, and I made my 3rd stubborn decision, the largest of my life, the one I have never once taken back. Whoever had set the trap at the ford, whoever had smiled at his weakness, whoever was still in this fortress waiting for the wound to win, they were going to have to get through me first. And I was 22 years old, and I ate last, and I slept by the window, and I had been in the household 11 days. Stay with me, because this is where they made their first mistake. They thought the omega was the easy part. I promised you the cold part, and I gave it to you. Now I owe you the ridiculous part, because both are true, and a life is never only one of them at a time. Because in the days after that morning, while I was quietly deciding to stand between a king and a war I could not yet prove, his wolf was courting me. Badly, relentlessly, with the dignity of a creature that has never once been embarrassed in its life. It began with my hairpin. I had lost it, I thought, in the still room. It turned up on the king's own pillow. I know this because Gunnar delivered it to me at arm's length, with the face of a man who has been asked to do many hard things in service of his king, and had not expected this to be one of them. I want you to know, Gunnar said, that he did not put it there. I believe him. I want you to know it very much. I believe him very much. Gunnar's mouth twitched. He was getting younger by the day, that man. It frightened me a little how much lighter a person becomes when a grief they have guarded alone for years finally has a second pair of hands on it. He had aged a decade in the 2 years of the third door. He was giving it back a season a week. The wolf escalated. It took to lying across my threshold at night, so that every morning I stepped over 100 pounds of alpha beast to leave my own room. And every morning, without fail, the king would appear in the corridor upright and rigid with dignity to inform me that it would not happen again. And every night it happened again. Once in a full council, in front of every lord of the Iron Territories, the wolf padded the length of the chamber and set a single winter rose on the map table directly in front of my chair. Where it had found a rose in the wrong season in a fortress of stone I will never know. And then it sat, and it looked at its own king, with an expression of frank and total expectation. And Rurik put his face in his hand and did not speak for the rest of the session. I laughed until I cried in the still room afterward. It is a very particular joy being chosen that badly by something that cannot help itself, while the man it belongs to stands 3 paces away, going quietly out of his mind, because that was the whole tension of it, and it was better than any nearness could have been. He stood 3 paces away when one would have done. He handed me a book on wound law across the full width of a table when he could have passed it to my hand. He held my eyes across the great hall until the holding said everything there was to say, and then broke it deliberately first. Always him, always first, because he had decided somewhere in those 2 years that he did not have the right to want anything, and his wolf had decided he was an idiot. And the second cup from that first night on stayed full. I noticed. I did not remark on it. But I want you to hold on to the warmth of that, because I am about to take it away, and I need you to remember, it was real. Because that is the thing they never understand. The patient, smiling men who wait in the dark. They think joy is a weakness. They think a man who has learned to laugh again is a man who has let down his guard. They have it exactly backward. A man with something to lose does not become weaker. I becomes dangerous. Here is how it came apart. It came apart at the map table 3 days after the winter rose, and it came apart because of me. Which I say not with pride, but because you have followed me this far, and deserve to know it was my doing. I had been thinking about the ford. I could not stop thinking about the ford. An ambush that knew where the king would turn. 2 blades placed. I had a healer's habit of worrying a thing until it opened, and I worried this one in the dark of my cot every night, turning it over, the smiling lord, the running hound, in the shadow of the gate. The trap that killed a brother and hollowed out a king. And on the 3rd morning, I did a thing an Omega had no business doing. I went to Gunnar, and I told him what I had seen at the gate. The stranger, the dark cloak, the brooch shaped like a running hound. Gunnar went very still. "You're certain of the mark," he said. "A hound with its head down. Dark metal. I have seen it once, and I will know it the rest of my life." "That is Ashfell," Gunnar said, quietly. "And no man of Ashfell has any business inside these walls. And Lord Kadok has less business than anyone meeting one." He looked at me for a long moment, and something moved behind his weathered face, some old suspicion finally finding the shape it had been missing. "The ford," he said, slowly. "You think the ford?" "I think." I said that the enemy knew exactly where the king would be that day. And I think there are not many people who could have told them. And I think one of them smiled when his king could not stand. Gunnar took it to Rurik, which is how that afternoon I found myself standing at the edge of a council. I had no rank to attend, while the king laid a single question before Lord Kadok gently. "The way you set a knife on a table without picking it up. You were seen at the North Gate," Rurik said, "some nights past, with a man wearing the Hound of Ashfell. I would like to hear you explain it, Uncle. I would like very much to hear it explained well." And here is where I learned what kind of danger Kadok truly was. Because a guilty man protests. A guilty man goes pale or loud or still. Kadok did none of these. Kadok smiled. "I was," he said, "easily, warmly. I have been managing a correspondence with Ashfell for some months, quietly, as one does when one's king has been too unwell for 2 years to manage his own borders, and someone must, or the whole territory comes apart, while we all politely pretend the throne is occupied." He spread his hands. "Rueful, reasonable. I did it for you, nephew. I did it so that when you finally rose, there would still be a kingdom to rise to. Forgive me for not troubling a dying man with the tedious work of keeping him alive. It was masterful. I will give him that even now. He took the truth, the real and damning truth, and he wrapped it in devotion, and he handed it back so that any man who struck at it would look like a fool striking his own loyal kinsman." And I watched the council waver. I watched lords who had known Kadok 30 years at uncertain. I watched the knife Rurik had set down slide quietly back toward his own hand. And Rurik hesitated, because he was a good man, and a good man's worst weakness is that he wants to believe the people who love him actually do. So I stepped forward, on Omega, into the middle of a king's council, with every lord of the Iron Territories turning to stare at the impossibility of it. And my heart was going so hard, I could feel it in my teeth, and I thought very clearly, "Elva, you have lost your mind." And then I opened my mouth anyway, because the alternative was watching a good man be talked out of the truth by a man who had killed his brother. "When did the correspondence begin?" I said. Kadok looked at me, the way you look at a chair that has spoken. "I beg your pardon. You said you have managed it for months, because the king was unwell. So it began after the king fell ill, after the ford." I kept my voice level. Level. The way you speak to the frightened animal. Except the frightened animal was a room full of wolves and me. "So explain the letter." "What letter?" "The one Gunner's men found this morning," I said, "in the saddlebag of the courier you met at the gate. The one they've been holding since dawn." I had not known until Gunner's face across the room told me I had guessed right, that there had been a courier caught. I had gambled. I had gambled on a smiling man's one flaw, which is that he cannot imagine being outmaneuvered by a chair. "It's dated 3 summers ago, isn't it? It's dated before the ford, which is a strange time to begin managing the king's borders, given the king was perfectly well and perfectly capable of managing them himself." The room went silent. I did not have the letter. I want to be honest with you always. I did not know for certain any such letter existed. But Gunner had caught a courier at dawn, and a man who meets enemies in the dark writes things down. They always write things down, and I had bet everything on it. My place, my skin, the whole absurd gamble of my life on the certainty that a man that arrogant would have left a trail he never imagined anyone beneath him would think to follow. And Kadok's face, for 1/2 of 1 second, before he mastered it. Kadok's smiling, reasonable face did the thing that told me I had guessed the whole of it. It flickered. The warm, empty room for half a heartbeat had someone standing in it, and that someone was afraid. Gunnar produced the letter. Because there was a letter. There is always a letter. And Gunnar, who had been holding it since dawn, uncertain what it meant, watching the Omega back a wolf lord into naming its own date, stepped forward and set it on the map table, and it was dated in Kadok's own hand, the spring before the ford. The correspondence had not begun because the king fell ill. The king had fallen ill because of the correspondence. Kadok had written to Ashfell first. Kadok had told them where the king would ride. Kadok had opened this gate 3 summers ago for the 2 blades at the ford. Not to kill Ruriko. That was never the plan. A dead king makes a martyr and a united pack. His plan was colder than murder. He had wanted a wounded king, a hollow king, a wolf on the throne too broken to rule for years, while the uncle managed the borders and married his niece to the failing line, and inherited a kingdom without ever once having to draw a blade in the open. He had killed Corvin to wound Rurik. He had wounded Rurik to empty the throne, and he had very nearly, very patiently, waited the whole thing out, until an Omega walked through the 3rd door and closed the wound he had opened. "Take him," Rurik said. And it went wrong, the way these things go wrong, fast and ugly, and with a cost. Because Kadok did not go quietly, and Kadok had men in that room, 2 of them sworn to him and not to the king, and one of them had a blade half drawn before anyone had moved. And Gunnar, who was closest to me, who had spent 2 years managing a grief and 1 week getting younger, put himself between that blade and the Omega, who had just unmade a traitor. I took it in the shoulder, deep, to the bone. I heard the sound it made, and I have never forgotten it. The room erupted. Wolves are faster than the eye, and it was over in the space of 3 breaths, Kadok's men down, and Kadok himself pinned against his own devotion with his arms wrenched behind him. But Gunnar was on the floor, and the blood was coming too fast, and I was on my knees in it, before I had decided to move my hands already inside the wound, doing the thing my hands do, taking the whole of me, so there was no room left for the fear. "Stay with me," I told him. "You do not get to do this. You put yourself in front of a blade for a woman who sleeps by a window, and now you are going to lie here and let me fix it. That is the arrangement, Gunnar. Those are the terms. You backed a wolf lord into a corner," he said, gray, half smiling, bleeding, with a letter you hadn't read. I rid his face, I said, packing the wound hard, fast, my hand slick to the wrist. The letter was a formality. He laughed, which was a terrible idea, and I told him so, and he did not die. I want to say that plainly, because I have made you hold your breath, and that is a cruelty I will not extend. Gunnar did not die. He carries the shoulder stiff now in the cold, and he blames me for it whenever it aches, which is his way of saying thank you, and I let him, because that is our arrangement. Those are the terms. But I did not have the luxury of relief, because catching Kadok did not end it. Catching Kadok started it, because Lord Kadok had already opened the door to Ashfell, and you cannot unopen a door. And across the northern river, the running hound had been waiting a generation for the Iron Territories to show a soft throat, and now their man in the fortress was in chains, and their patient game was blown, and there was no reason left to be patient. Ashfell came within the week. I will not give you the whole of the war, because I was not in the whole of it, and I will not tell you what I did not see. But I will give you the night it turned, because that night was Rurik's, and it is the reason I could ever stand beside him after. They massed at the northern ford. The same ford. Of course, the same ford. These things always return to the wound. And the Iron Territories rode out to meet them, and I stood on the wall with the other healers, and my hands full of linen, and I watched the man I loved ride toward the exact place his brother had died, at the head of a pack that had spent 2 years wondering quietly whether their king still had a throat of his own. And here is what Rurik did. And it is the bravest thing I ever saw a man do, and there was no blade in it at all. He stopped his host at the edge of the ford, in the gray before the fighting, within sight of both armies. And he dismounted, and in front of the whole of his pack, and the whole of Ashfell's, the strongest wolf alive, who had spent 2 years hiding his grief behind a locked door, as though it were a shame, spoke his brother's name aloud into the open air. "Corvin," he said, and the wall carried it. "My brother died here. He died holding me together with his own hand, so that I would live. And I have spent 2 years letting his death make me smaller, letting it make me a door someone could pry open." His voice did not break. I had held that voice while it broke in a cold room, and it did not break now, out here in the open, where his people could hear. "That ends at this ford where it began. I am done being the wound my enemies opened. I am the man my brother died to save. And I will not dishonor his hand by losing the life it paid for." And he did not hide it. That is the thing. That is the whole of it. He took the grief that a patient man had spent 3 years using as a weapon against him, and he held it up in front of everyone in the light, and it stopped being a weakness the moment he stopped hiding it. You cannot pry open a door a man has already thrown wide. You cannot blackmail a king with a wound he names out loud to his whole army before the fighting even starts. Kadok's entire plan had rested on the wound staying secret, staying shameful, staying a locked room. And Rurik opened the door himself in front of everyone. Ashfell broke on the iron pack that night like water on stone, because you cannot beat a wolf who has stopped being afraid of his own grief. Their whole strategy had been built on a hollow king, and the king was not hollow anymore, and their man inside was in chains. And by the gray of the next morning, the running hound was running the other way back across the river, and did not come again in my lifetime. I dressed wounds for 2 days without sleeping. That is what the wall of a battle looks like from where I stood. Not glory. Linen and Willow and the boys who did not come back, and the ones who did, and wished for a while that they hadn't. I will not pretty it for you. War is only ever grief that has not happened yet, and I spent those 2 days at the front of it, with my hands full. But on the second night, Rurik found me. In the healer's hall, blood to my elbows, so tired I was swaying on my feet. And he did not say anything grand. He was not a grand man. He picked up a strip of linen, and he stood beside me, the king of the Iron Territories, and he began clumsily to help me roll bandages. 3 paces had become none. "You gambled everything on a letter you hadn't read," he said, quietly, rolling linen badly. "In the middle of my council, in front of every lord I have." I read his face, I said, again, too tired to say anything new. "You could have been wrong." I wasn't. "You could have been." And he stopped rolling the linen. And he looked at me, and there was something in his face I had not let myself look at directly, not once in all the weeks of 3 paces, and winter roses, and a wolf on my threshold. Every healer I turned away for 2 years was protecting themselves, protecting their careers, their standing, their skins. You walked into a war council with no rank and no proof, and a letter you had not read, and you did it to protect me. He set the linen down. No one has protected me since Corvin. I had decided I did not get to have that anymore, that it died at the ford with him. "It didn't die at the ford," I said. "You just locked it behind a door and told everyone not to knock." And I watched him understand, standing in a hall full of the wounded, with a strip of linen in his hand, that the thing he had been protecting himself from for 2 years was the same thing he had been starving for. Someone foolish enough to knock. I did not kiss me. Not there. not yet. He was Rurik, and he was always first and always too aware of the eyes, and there were 100 eyes in that hall. But he reached out, and he tucked a strand of blood-matted hair behind my ear and breath, no more the most that a man, that careful, would allow himself in front of his people. And it undid me more than any kiss could have, because it was not desire. It was recognition. The vertiginous, impossible recognition of being seen all the way down by someone who had every reason in the world to keep his eyes shut and was choosing in front of everyone to open them. 2 weeks, he said. Rough. When this is cleared, and the wounded are healed, and Kadok is dealt with by the law, and not by my temper. There is to be a naming. The first in 2 years. The court reconfirmed the household set right. He looked at me. I want you there. Not at the low end of the hall. At the front. I'm still an Omega, I said. I still eat last. You backed a wolf lord into naming his own treason with a chair and a bluff. The corner of his mouth. All the way. I think the days of you eating last are behind us, Elva. I did not know that night, rolling bandages beside a king in a hall, full of the wounded, that the naming would be where they made their last attempt on him. That grief and ambition are a family, and a family does not lose the throne quietly. That there was one more player who had loved this game more than anyone, and had just watched her uncle fall, and her future fall with him, and had 2 weeks to decide how far a woman raised to be a queen will go, when the crown walks past her outstretched hand for the very last time. I only knew that the wound was closing, that the cup was full, that the man beside me was not hollow anymore, and that somewhere in the fortress in a room I could not see someone beautiful was standing very still and deciding, stay with me, because the cup is about to fall. And you already know I catch it. What you do not yet know is what it cost. The naming came 2 weeks later, and I want to tell you about the light first because the light is how I knew the world had changed. The Great Hall had been dark for 2 years. Everyone said so, though no one had noticed it happening the way you do not notice a room dimming while you are still in it. But that morning, the shutters were thrown wide, and the summer poured in off the courtyard, and the wolf throne that had sat in shadow so long stood in a bar of honest gold. And the second cup at the king's right hand was full, and had been full for weeks, and no one pretended not to see it any more. That was the first thing. They had stopped pretending not to see it. We drank to Corvin now out loud, by name, before every meal. The whole hall. A thing that had been a shameful secret, behind a locked door, had become a thing the pack did together in the light, and I have never in my life seen a grief get smaller the way that one did. Not gone. Grief does not go, but carried by everyone, which is the only way a thing that heavy ever gets carried at all. I stood at the front of the hall this time, in a dress that was not patched because Rurik had over my objections had one made, and I had lost that argument, the way I was beginning to lose all the arguments, where he was quietly, but I was still an Omega. But I was an Omega. The whole territory had watched back a traitor into his own confession with a bluff and a borrowed chair, and no one that day was looking at me the way you look at someone standing on thin ice. They were looking at me the way you look at the person who turned out to know where the cracks were all along. Lady Myrith was there. I had wondered if she would come. Her uncle was in the Eastern Tower awaiting the judgment of the law, which Rurik had insisted on. Cold and correct, no temper, no wolf. Only the slow machinery of justice, grinding a traitor down the way it was meant to. Her future had fallen with him. The line she had been raised to marry into had chosen a healer's apprentice over her in front of the world. She had lost the throne, the uncle, the plan. The whole architecture of a life built since before she could walk. And she came to the naming in white, and she was more beautiful than I had ever seen her, and she was smiling. I should have known then. I did know somewhere under my ribs the same place that had smelled the wound through the door. But I told myself she had come to accept it with grace, because that is what I would have done. And that is the mistake, isn't it? We measure other people with our own hearts, and forget that not everyone was built to the same plan. Rurik rose to speak the naming. To reconfirm the household raise who was to be raised, set right what 2 years of a dark room had left crooked. And Mireth rose first. It was a breach of every custom in the Iron Territories, and she made it look like grace. She held a cup, a beautiful thing, chased silver catching the new light, and she lifted it up the length of the hall, toward the dais, toward the king, and she spoke in a voice pitched to reach the farthest wall. "A gift," she said, "for my king, to his health, to his recovery, and to the healer who restored it to us all." The word came out of her smooth as poured wine, and only I think heard the splinter in the middle of it. Let him drink to her before us all, and settle the question this whole court has been asking. Let there be no more whispers. Let the king honor the woman his wolf chose. It was masterful. The same blood as her uncle, and the same gift, and I understood in that moment that the danger in that family had never been the loud, beautiful niece. It had been the whole poisoned line patient and smiling, and Kadok had only been the one who had not yet been caught. Because to refuse the cup was to insult her house on the day her house was already broken, which would look like cruelty. And to make me drink was beneath the dignity of a naming. So, of course, the king would drink, graciously, to end the whispers, to honor the healer. And not one soul in that bright hall would think as he lifted it about the fact that Lady Mareth's grandmother had been the most gifted poisoner in 3 territories, and that a gift like that runs in the blood. But I knew. I do not fully know how I knew even now. A healer knows the smell of most things that end a life. And under the wine, and under the crushed mint laid over the wine, there was a ghost. The faintest, bitter ghost of a thing my grandmother had made me memorize with a switch across my knuckles when I was small and wanted to be anywhere else. Monkshood. Enough to stop a heart in the night. Enough to be called by morning, a bad night's rest, a strain of the recovery, a sad and natural thing the poor king so soon after the war his heart simply gave. The cup began its journey up the hall, hand to hand, toward the dais, toward the man I loved who was already reaching for it with the easy open courtesy of someone who had at long last learned to trust the room again. That was the cruelty of it. She had built the trap out of his own healing. He would never, ever have reached for that cup 2 years ago. The old Rurik, the hollow one, the locked door, would have suspected it. It was the healed man, the man I had given back to the world who reached for poison with an open hand, because I had taught him the room was safe. I did not shout. I want you to understand that because it is the whole of who I am. Shouting would have ended me. The Omega accusing a lady of the king's own court, on a feeling, on a smell, in front of the whole territory. They would have called it exactly what she needed them to call it. Jealousy, ambition, witchery. She had built the trap so that any noise I made would snap it shut on my own throat. So I did not make noise. I walked. I walked up the length of the great hall. past the nobles, past the ranked warriors, past the place where a wolf had once walked to choose me, along the same stones in front of the same eyes. And I reached the dais exactly as the cup reached the king's hand. And I did the only thing that could not be argued with. I took it from him, and I struck it out of the air. The cup fell. And I caught it against my palm before it hit the stone. Because a healer catches things, it is the oldest habit I have. And the poisoned wine ran down my wrist instead of into his blood. The same wrist. The same wine. I have told you how this begins, because it is where I began. That night the whole court went silent. And now you are standing in it with me, and you know what I know, and the hall does not. And the hall erupted, and Myrith's voice rose over all of it, high and certain and triumphant, because I had just handed her the ending she had planned for. Which, she cried. She strikes the cup from the king's own hand. She cannot bear to see him honored. She fears what a true gift reveals. Seize her, and that is where the night I opened with began. Because Rurik came down off the dais. Not up in fury, down, onto his knees, on the stone, in front of the whole court. And he took my wine-soaked wrist in both his enormous hands, and he did not look at Myrith, and he did not look at his guards, and he looked only at me. What was in the cup? He said. Quiet, just for me. But his wolf said it for the whole hall. The great gold beast came out from behind the throne, and it stood between me and every drawn blade in the room, hackles high, a sound in its chest like a mountain clearing its throat. And it turned its head, and it looked down the length of the bright hall, not at me, at Myrith, and it snarled. The whole court watched the king's wolf name the threat in the room. And the threat was not the Omega with wine on her wrist. The threat was the beautiful woman in white with the empty cup in her hand and the smile going stiff on her face. Monkshood, I said, and my voice did not shake. I was proud of that later. Enough to stop your heart in the night, my king. Enough to be called a bad night's rest by morning. Smell it yourself. It's on my skin now, instead of in your blood. I lifted my chin. The hall was so silent I could hear the new-lit torches breathe. You're free to be angry with me for striking your cup. I'll take the punishment for the discourtesy gladly. I would rather be flogged for insolence than bury you for manners. Rurik lifted my wrist. He smelled the wine. And I watched the king of the Iron Territories understand, in front of his entire court, exactly how close he had come, and exactly who had stepped between him and it, and exactly who had planned it, and how long, and how patiently, and out of what family of smiling, patient blood. He rose. He did not let go of my hand. "Lode Myrith," he said, and his voice was the one I had heard through the wound, doubled the wolf in it, and it filled the hall to the rafters. You will be escorted to the eastern tower tonight to await the same law as your uncle. And when it has spoken, you will be put across the border, and you will not return to the Iron Territories again. She had gone the color of ash. I knew that color. I had seen it on him in a dark room a lifetime ago. You could kill me, she said. And there was something almost like hope in it. Some final theater, the doomed queen, the grand ending. It is what your temper wants. It is, Rurik agreed, and that is exactly why I will not. He looked at her, and there was no cruelty in it, which was somehow worse for her than cruelty would have been. Your family has spent 3 years teaching this pack that power is a thing you take by poisoning what you cannot inherit. I am going to teach it something else. You will live. You will be nothing. And the cruelty ends with you, because I refuse to be the next link in a chain your grandmother started. He turned away from her, which was the whole of her sentence. Take her, And I understood something, watching him turn his back on the woman who had just tried to murder him and choose the slow, cold law over the fast, warm blade. This was the healing, not the wound closing. This. A man who had every reason and every right to answer poison with slaughter, choosing instead to break the thing rather than feed it. You do not end a cycle of cruelty by being crueler. You end it by being the one who finally, at cost, refuses. I had told him in a cold room that he did not get to grieve his brother by dying. And here he was, refusing to honor him by killing either. Corvin had thrown himself in front of blades so that his brother would live. Not so his brother would deal death for the rest of his days in his name. The cruelty ended in that hall. I watched it end. It is the proudest thing I know. Mireth was taken, and the hall was silent. And Rurik turned back to me, and he was still holding my hand wine-stained in front of all of them. And he did the thing his wolf had been trying to make him do for weeks. The thing his grief had told him for 2 years he had no right to do. He raised my hand to his mouth, and he pressed his lips to my wine-stained knuckles. One breath. No more. The kind of kiss that is a sentence and not a scene. His wolf chose you the first day, he said. Lo. Just for me, though, the hall heard every word because he meant them to. Without asking me. It was always ahead of me. I have been trying to catch up to it since you walked through a door you had no business opening. His thumb moved once over my knuckles. I am asking now, late and badly and in front of far too many people. Stay, not as my healer. Stay. And I looked at the king, kneeling. No, standing. But he had knelt. They had all seen him kneel. And I thought about the second cup full now, and the frost that had stopped crawling, and the wolf asleep across my threshold, and the man who would rather have bled for 2 years than risk a single soul in a dark room, standing here in the light in front of everyone, risking the largest thing there is. I told you the first night. I said that I hadn't learned yet which jobs I was allowed to refuse. The whole hall leaned in to hear the Omega answer the king. I've decided I'm refusing this one. I let him see me smile. You don't get to be alone in the cold anymore, Rurik. That's not a healer's order. My voice did the thing his had done through the wound, the thing that meant it all the way down. It's just advice, and this time you're not free to ignore it. And the gold wolf sat down between us, and thumped its tail once against the stone, insufferably pleased with itself. And the great hall of the Iron Territories, which 2 years ago had gone dark, and which had once come to watch an Omega, fall watched instead. The strongest wolf alive be caught at long last by the one person too new to know she was supposed to be afraid. They mated us under the next full moon, which is the proper way of it. And I will not describe that night except to tell you that Corvin's cup has stayed full at the king's table ever since, and that we still drink to him by name before every meal, so that no one in that hall ever again mistakes grief for something to hide behind a closed door. The wound closed. I want to be honest about what it cost the night it finally knit. Because the cold came back one last time, worse than before, the whole chamber, white with frost and the air gone to stone in my lungs. The wolf's grief making its final argument. That to close the wound was to lose the hand that had held it. That letting the last of Corvin seal over was a betrayal it could not allow. I held on. I put my own palm over the place where his brother's hand had been. And I told the wolf out loud, loud in a voice I kept level though my teeth wanted to chatter, that a hand does not have to stay pressed to a wound to have held it. That letting go is not the same as forgetting. That Corvin's hand had done its work, had bought the life it was pressed to save, and that keeping the wound open forever did not keep him alive. It only kept his brother dying. And I do not entirely know whether the wolf understood the words, or only my refusal to leave. But the frost melted one white feather at a time back into ordinary glass, and the wound sealed under my hand. Silver, shaped faintly like a palm, and it stayed that way, so that Rurik carries the mark of his brother's last choice on his ribs. Healed instead of open, remembered instead of bleeding. He touches it sometimes without knowing that he does. I have never once told him. Some things you give a person by not watching them. 6 months on I am the Luna of the Iron Territories, which still strikes me most mornings as an administrative error that no one has thought to correct. I have a still room the size of my old village's chapel. And I have an apprentice of my own, now a frightened boy from the Eastern Holdings, whom I sent on his 4th day to the 3rd door in the healer's wing, with a tray of clean linen and instructions not to knock. He knocked. Of course he did. I chose him for it. A letter came last week from the village I grew up in. From the healer's mistress, who once told me I would never rise above soft hands and a soft throat. She had heard she wrote a rumor she could not credit, that an Omega girl from her own house had married a king, and would I be so kind as to confirm it so that she might put the foolish story to rest. I confirmed it. I did not gloat. Gloating and grace wear the same coat in my experience, and it is very hard to tell them apart from a distance. Easier up close, where you can see which one is smiling. Rurik found me writing the reply at his own table, in the seat at his right hand, which is not empty, and never will be again. Though there is still a full cup beside it, that we do not drink from because it is Corvin's, and some places you keep set. "What are you telling her?" he asked, reading over my shoulder in the firelight. His wolf a warm gold weight against both our feet. "The truth," I said, "that no one told the new healer which patient to avoid, and that it is the best mistake I never meant to make. So here is what I want to know from you, before I let you go. Do you think his wolf knew what it was doing that first day in the hall? That it chose me on purpose, the way an animal chooses, sure of a thing the rest of us take 2 years, and a war and a poisoned cup to work out? Or was it only grief reaching for the nearest warm thing in a cold room, and getting luckier than any of us deserved? I have lived inside the answer for 6 months now, and I still cannot decide. Where are you listening from tonight? Pull up a chair. There is a cup, and it is full.